I've been quietly observing this site for some time, and now I'll share my story, even though it's quite lengthy and still unfolding due to an ongoing custody battle for my friend's daughter. Since the case is currently in court, I'll be cautious about sharing too many details to avoid any self-incrimination. I'll use pseudonyms and omit some specifics to maintain anonymity. So let's get started. This story revolves around my former best friend and business partner along with his wife. He's still a friend, but our closeness has waned. This situation has had a significant impact on both our lives, and I believe I'm in a position to narrate the story. Some of you might perceive me as the antagonist here, and perhaps I am, but before passing judgment, try to put yourself in my shoes. Maybe you'll understand me, maybe not, but either way, I'm not too concerned. My friend, whom I'll call Alex, and I grew up together in the Midwest. Alex is a genuinely nice guy who wouldn't harm a soul. An introverted, geeky, and highly intelligent individual. Despite having contrasting personalities, we got along famously. We're the same age and share a passion for playing video games. After high school, I joined the military since I had been part of ROTC during my high school years. Alex wanted to enlist alongside me, but his father objected, particularly during the turbulent times in the Middle East when politicians and the media were clamoring for war. Alex's father was firmly against the Middle East conflicts, and while I'm not saying he was wrong, I witnessed many of my friends tragically lose their lives in those wars. Alex could have been one of them. Unfortunately, things didn't turn out well for Alex, as he's currently serving a 20-plus-year sentence in prison. It seems his destiny led him down this path due to a woman-related situation. I couldn't help but ponder how I might have influenced the course of events. Perhaps I could have intervened earlier to prevent his relationship with his future wife from progressing. When he first mentioned it over the phone while I was nearing the end of my military service, I wondered if I was just as responsible as he was, as I had been hesitant to reveal the truth to him. I still hold secrets that I haven't disclosed to Alex, fearing it would break his heart. After 8 years of dedicated military service, I received an honorable discharge, with the majority of my time spent in the Middle East. A few days after my return, I reached out to Alex, inviting him for a drink at the bar. Alex has become quite busy lately, having declined my invitation once before. It's been increasingly challenging to get him to take a break from work. While I was in the military, we occasionally caught up during my leaves and visits home, but we've been drifting apart. Alex now runs his own specialized manufacturing company, which appears to have paid off handsomely for him. He graduated from college with a degree in bioengineering and has transformed his business into a 7-figure enterprise in less than 4 years since my military exit. On the contrary, I spent 8 years in the military and now find myself unemployed, lacking marketable skills for a high-paying job. Feels like I'm starting anew. Alex's impressive success doesn't surprise me. He's always been the intelligent one with all the answers. The primary purpose of our meeting was to persuade him to hire me for his rapidly growing business. We had discussed this possibility extensively when he first launched the business while I was still in the military. I believed I could assist with customer relations and sourcing parts from overseas. At that time, he frequently traveled to Asian countries to find vendors for fabricating components used in the products designed by his team, and I thought I could be of assistance in various aspects. We had extensively discussed the idea before about me joining him once I completed my service. So on that day, I arrived early at the bar with hopes of meeting him, considering he had canceled on me previously. As I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed his car right behind mine. Back then, his business was already flourishing, and he was driving his dream sports car, which I won't specify to maintain anonymity. I was thrilled to see him as it had been 2 years since our last meeting. He had put on about 40 pounds since I last saw him. We exchanged pleasantries as we entered the bar. Alex isn't the type to frequent bars or indulge in drinking. Meeting at a bar had become a habit I'd adopted over the years. During our conversation at the bar, I attempted to broach the employment topic we had discussed years earlier, but he skillfully avoided it. He seemed more interested in discussing his Chinese wife, whom he had met in China and brought to the United States on a spousal visa. We had talked about her on the phone about a year ago when he first brought her to the States. He mentioned that he had met her 2 years ago while traveling in China to source suppliers for a component he designed for his latest product. Coincidentally, she had served as his translator and liaison, leading to her swift hiring. She had worked from China for about a year before relocating to the US. Currently, she oversees part sourcing and manages international and local supply chain distribution for his company. Alex mentioned that they now jointly own the business, splitting it 50-50. After bringing her over with a spousal visa a year ago, they had a courthouse wedding in China. However, now that she's in the US, she desired a traditional white wedding, which had always been her childhood dream. Alex leans more towards the geeky side and tends to be socially awkward. He tends to become deeply infatuated with any girl who shows him attention, which I often caution him about because it rarely ends well. So being myself, I tried to advise him regarding this relationship as well. I thought she had gained too much control over his business in a remarkably short period of time. He even mentioned that they hadn't been physically intimate because she wanted a white wedding first and wanted it to be special, so it should take place after their wedding night. To me, this seemed utterly absurd and raised a significant red flag. Despite knowing her for 2 years, bringing her to the United States, granting her control over crucial aspects of his business, living with her for almost a year, and being legally married to her, they still hadn't consummated their marriage. I may not be an expert in Chinese culture, but it strikes me as uncommon these days for a woman to remain celibate after a man has done so much for her. I inquired why they hadn't had their white wedding yet, and he explained that her parents were facing visa issues but were close to resolving them because she wanted her parents to be present. I was skeptical of this explanation and voiced my doubts, stating that if I were in his shoes, she would have given up her celibacy by now. He didn't appreciate my comment and became defensive, expressing my confusion about what made her so special. He listed her qualities. She's a great business partner, very intelligent, beautiful, and hardworking. I cautioned him about granting her control over his business, noting that many Asian girls possess these qualities, so she wasn't necessarily unique. I found it unusual that they hadn't consummated their marriage after being together for such a long time. I could tell Alex was growing irritated with my questioning and my attempt to challenge his wife's motives. So I decided to refocus on the reason for our meeting. When I circled back to the job opportunity he had promised me, I sensed that my previous questions had already annoyed him. His mood shifted, and he seemed unwilling to discuss the promised opportunity. It felt like the Alex I once knew had changed, possibly due to his newfound wealth, and he might have believed I shouldn't voice my opinions. At the end of our meeting, he tentatively promised to let me know after reevaluating his available positions. After that meeting, I couldn't help but feel that the friend I once knew was no longer there. All that remained was a business-minded geek deeply in love with a woman he barely knew, being strung along. It was at that moment I made a promise to myself. If he offered me a job in his company, I would always tell him what he wanted to hear, essentially becoming a yes man. I had to prioritize looking out for myself. About 3 days later, he called and invited me to his home that evening. I prepared myself as if I were going to a job interview. Meeting someone I used to be best friends with had never made me so tense. But I wanted that job. I didn't want to overstep or say anything that might displease him. I understood that people grow apart. Someone who was your best friend a few years ago can change due to life experiences and environmental factors. I wasn't sure whether I would meet his wife since they lived together. I arrived at his house around 9 or 10 p.m., and he had a really nice house in a good part of town, although it wasn't overly extravagant. At this point, I still resided with my parents and drove a car that wasn't worth much, so that offer meant a lot to me at the time. When I entered their home, Alex's wife, whom I'll call Mia, was there. She appeared reserved and proper in her greetings, which I figured might be one of the reasons Alex liked her, in addition to her striking beauty. She even prepared some Chinese food for dinner. After we finished eating, the three of us moved to the living room, where we discussed business over a glass of wine. To keep it short, I was offered the position of vice president for customer relations and sourcing, with 2 employees reporting to me. Essentially, I would be the 3rd highest ranking person in the company after Mia and Alex. I also gained more insights into their business. They had around 10 employees at that time, primarily focused on manufacturing medical equipment and components serving various industries. They were involved in engineering and assembling these parts, with all their components sourced from Asia. Their business model was quite profitable because they could invent and patent parts that customers needed for a long time, becoming the sole supplier. This allowed them to control prices with no competition. I also realized that Mia played a more significant role in the business than I initially thought. She handled supply chain management, customer relations, marketing, and had some involvement in hiring. Alex, as the company president, was responsible for engineering, quality control, and patents. Therefore, my role would be more supportive of Mia than Alex, at least initially. Mia spoke English well with a Chinese accent, and she was stunningly beautiful. She appeared highly competent and well connected with suppliers and customers despite being only 25, just 2 years younger than us. Alex mentioned that they were expediting my hiring because he and Mia were planning a business trip to China and Vietnam in a few months. He wanted me to take his place on the trip so that Mia could introduce me to their suppliers, believing it was an excellent opportunity to bring me into the expanding business. Mia made this trip roughly every 2 months, so it would be beneficial for me to assist and learn that aspect of the business. During our meeting, we enjoyed some wine, and both Alex and Mia seemed to loosen up a bit. In hindsight, I could see that Mia was putting on a bit of a facade in front of Alex, but occasionally her more outgoing personality would shine through. I didn't think much of it at the time, and even if I had, I wouldn't have brought it up, knowing how sensitive Alex was to any criticism about his wife. Approximately 1 week later, I began my on-the-job training, secured my own office, and started learning the ropes. 2 weeks after that, there was a manufacturing expo happening in Vegas, where numerous clients from the medical industry were expected to attend. It presented a fantastic opportunity to showcase our products and our company's capabilities. Alex, Mia, another male colleague, and I were scheduled to attend the 3-day expo, and we had rented a small booth for the event. I was fortunate to be invited on this trip, as it would allow me to gain further insight into the business, especially since I'd be responsible for promoting our products to customers and expo attendees. The expo was scheduled from Wednesday to Friday, and our plan was to fly in on Tuesday, with our return flight contingent on the outcome of the meetings and any potential exploration of the city. We arrived in Vegas on a Wednesday evening, and all 4 of us stayed in the same hotel. Initially, I thought I wouldn't have a chance to explore the city due to my focus on marketing and product materials. However, I had some questions, so I decided to visit Alex and Mia's suite to seek their input. When I entered their hotel room, Alex informed me that Mia had gone downstairs for a brief break. Alex appeared to be reviewing some designs but couldn't provide clear answers to some of my questions, as they pertained more to Mia's area of the business. After my meeting with Alex, I left his room and contemplated checking on Mia. Alex was not the type to hang out at the bar just for drinks. He wasn't much of a drinker, so I assumed there must have been a specific reason for her absence, perhaps related to business or meeting friends. As I headed downstairs to see if Mia was at the casino, I spotted her engaged in conversation with a man at the bar. Upon noticing me, she waved me over to join them. When I approached, I was taken aback that they started asking for my opinion on a particular horse racing competition being broadcast on TV. I had no knowledge of horse racing, but I had a suspicion that they were trying to divert my attention because she had been caught in an awkward situation. Initially, I didn't think there was anything amiss with her talking to someone at the bar. She might have been networking for the business, which was, after all, the purpose of our trip to Vegas. However, her demeanor and reactions gave me a distinct vibe, as if she were trying to conceal something. They were sharing a drink and seemed to be engaging in some light flirting before they were discovered. She attempted to downplay the situation by suggesting they wanted my opinion on horse racing. However, a clear indicator was the man's swift departure, wearing a disappointed expression. I then began discussing the questions I needed clarification on with Mia. By that point, she had already consumed a couple of drinks before my arrival, making her more open than usual. Given my social nature, I engaged in a conversation that flowed well, during which we delved into her relationship with Alex. Surprisingly, she had few positive things to say about him. She expressed dissatisfaction with his work-centric focus, his tendency to pass judgment on everything, and his rigid ideas about how people should behave. I refrained from offering any input on her relationship with Alex, simply going along with the conversation. I had learned not to get involved in their issues before. It was during this conversation that I gained additional insights into her background. She was born in China, the only child of her parents. Her upbringing was in a traditional Chinese household with strict parents, but she had a wealthy uncle, her father's younger brother, who provided her with a good education. She had also visited the United States several times on vacation, graduated from college early, and worked as a liaison between Chinese and foreign businesses, which is how she had initially met Alex. Our conversation continued for at least an hour as we got to know each other better. The bar had only a few patrons, with most of them at the casino, and everyone was preoccupied with their own business. We were getting along remarkably well that night, and I couldn't help but feel a certain chemistry developing between us. To alleviate the tension, I jokingly suggested that we should invite Alex to join us, but she informed me that Alex was already asleep and that late-night bar outings weren't his cup of tea. I knew she was right. It wasn't his preferred environment. However, this was one of those questions you ask when you sense heightened tension, only to regret it afterward. Feeling a bit overwhelmed by explicit thoughts and the growing romantic atmosphere, I excused myself to use the restroom. While she wasn't explicitly making advances, we were both engaging in mild flirting. I might even admit to being the one who initiated it while she simply played along. Perhaps I could attribute it to the influence of alcohol. I decided to excuse myself to relieve some tension because I felt like I was on the verge of crossing a line with my best friend and my boss's wife, whom he deeply cares about. I certainly wasn't willing to jeopardize my job over this woman. Besides, I didn't see myself as that kind of guy, or at least I thought so. I headed to the bathroom to adjust my pants, and by the time I returned, I noticed another man attempting to flirt with her while she remained seated at the bar. He quickly walked away as soon as I arrived back at my seat. Upon returning, I sat down next to her and took a closer look at her, realizing why she attracted so much attention. She was undeniably stunning, easily a 9 or 10 on a scale from 1 to 10. As I sat beside her, she noticed my gaze fixed on her. All I could come up with was commenting on the music, suggesting we should dance, even though it was meant to be a lighthearted joke because the music was subpar, a real elevator tune. She chuckled for a moment and replied that it was a slow dance track, and she wasn't a fan. It was supposed to be a humorous remark, and I was surprised she took it seriously given the terrible soundtrack. However, I played along and asked her what type of music she preferred. She mentioned dance tracks like R&B, EDM, and house music. Feeling like I had gone too far, I mustered the courage to ask if she'd like to check out some Vegas clubs that played that kind of music. To my astonishment, she was familiar with the clubs she wanted to visit, as if she had been there before. Curious, I inquired how she knew about them, and she explained that she had visited Vegas with a friend for her friend's birthday and had experienced some of the city's club scenes. Additionally, she had been to Vegas on business numerous times. It almost felt like she was boasting. At that moment, I couldn't help but think that this wasn't the Mia I thought I knew. I suspected that Alex had given her a considerable amount of freedom, especially considering her claim that she wouldn't get intimate with him until they had a white wedding. I was confident that she was concealing her true personality from Alex and wasn't the virtuous woman she portrayed herself to be. What I witnessed that night was a manipulative, intelligent, and attractive woman who enjoyed flirting and garnering attention from men, especially when they weren't her husband. I couldn't help but feel that Alex was in a precarious situation with her, as she appeared highly ambitious and dissatisfied with her current position. It seemed like she was trying to carve out her own empire, with Alex merely serving as a means to that end. I followed her lead, and we headed to a Vegas club playing EDM and house music. The line to get in was quite long, so we patiently waited, using the time to flirt with each other. We were both a bit tipsy, lost in our own little world. Once inside the club, our hands were all over each other, and we hit the dance floor, grinding against each other as if we were dancing intimately, even though we were fully clothed. At one point, I got carried away and had 2 of my fingers inside her as we danced. She stopped me and suggested we head back before Alex started looking for her. Glancing at the clock, I realized it was already around 1 a.m., and she was right. I needed to be up early to open our booth, so I needed some sleep for the long day ahead. We left the club and joined the taxi queue. To skip the line, I slipped the guy in charge a $20 bill, and we got into the cab. During the short drive back to the hotel, with Mia and me in the back seat, we started making out, and before I knew it, she unzipped my pants and began performing oral sex on me in the back of the taxi. She didn't seem to mind that the driver was watching us through the rearview mirror. We were just a few blocks from our hotel when the cab driver jokingly told us to stop and suggested we get a room. Mia halted after that, and the cab dropped us off at the hotel. Once inside the elevator, we realized we were staying on the same floor. I thought we might continue where we left off in my room, but she simply wished me good night and went to the room she shared with her husband. That night, I stayed up late thinking about what could have happened. The following morning, I was awakened by a knock on my door. It was the other employee who had come with us, and we were supposed to be packing and setting up our booth early before the expo attendees arrived. Our plan was to be there before 7 a.m., but it was already a few minutes past 7 a.m., so I quickly got ready, brushed my teeth, and went downstairs. I wasn't even sure how Mia would react when she saw me, but when I spotted Alex and Mia having breakfast downstairs, she greeted me as if nothing had happened the night before. We didn't have the time to join them, so we informed them that we were heading to the venue to unpack and prepare. Upon arriving at the venue, we unpacked and got everything ready. We had a few attendees and potential customers who visited our booth, and I was busy promoting our products before Mia and Alex arrived. Every now and then, I tried to catch Mia's eye while attending to people, but she wouldn't even make eye contact or engage in conversation with me. It was uncomfortable, almost as if she was avoiding me and regretting what had happened. I began to wonder if alcohol had played a role in her behavior, as she had seemed tipsy that night, and I felt like I had taken advantage of her. I feared that she might confess to Alex before the expo ended, potentially costing me not only my job but also a friend. To add to the tension, she left the expo early that day with Alex, explaining that she wasn't feeling well. I suspected that part of her reason for leaving was my presence, as I felt like I had made her uncomfortable. Sharing a taxi with Alex after the expo, I wrestled with the decision of whether to confess to him. I wanted to take control of the situation, but explaining how his wife ended up performing oral sex on me during a cab ride home from the club would be incredibly awkward. So I remained silent throughout the rest of the day. My mind couldn't focus on anything else but the situation with Mia. I was concerned not only about that situation but also about the potential consequences for my job, reputation, and overall embarrassment. I felt the need to talk to her urgently and couldn't wait until the following day. That evening, I went to the hotel bar, hoping she might be there like the previous night, but she wasn't. It was a long and uneasy evening. The next day at the expo, while manning the booth, Alex was away meeting with a customer, and the other employee was out, leaving just me and Mia alone at the booth. With no visitors around, there was an opportunity to speak to Mia privately, but I struggled to find the right words. I called out to her, attempting to say something, but I kept stumbling over my words. She had this puzzled expression on her face as if she was thinking, "What's wrong with you, dude?" Eventually, I mustered an apology, and she replied with a curt, "I know, it won't happen again." She then simply looked away and continued with her tasks, acting as if nothing had occurred. It was almost as if that entire night had been erased from her memory. The tension was broken when a visitor approached our booth with questions about our product. After that, I left feeling somewhat relieved. Her reaction when we were alone was so distant that you'd think someone who had done what she did would have more to say. I returned to the hotel that night feeling slightly better than the previous day, and I had a good night's sleep. The following morning, which was the last day of the event, was supposed to be a half day at the booth with some meetings scheduled with potential customers interested in our services. The other employee and I spent most of the day arranging for our products to be shipped back home. Alex and Mia visited our booth a couple of times, but the majority of their day was spent in private meetings with clients and customers. I had normal interactions with Mia that day with no awkwardness. It was as if the incident from 2 days ago had never happened. At the end of the day, all four of us shared an Uber ride back to the airport after the event. I sat in the front seat while Alex, Mia, and the other employee sat in the back. I glanced at the rearview mirror and saw Alex and Mia chatting and laughing with each other and the other employee. I felt like I had narrowly avoided a disaster, and I was relieved that things hadn't escalated further with Mia. The trip to China got postponed, although I can't recall the exact reason. However, I knew that Alex and Mia had plans for a white wedding, which had been Mia's long-standing wish. Her parents had already come to the United States from China, and most of Alex's employees attended the wedding. At this point, my interactions with Alex had become less frequent, and our relationship had shifted more towards that of an employee and boss. I was earning more money than I could have ever imagined elsewhere, and I could foresee my income doubling within a year based on the company's performance. During this period, we also hired 6 additional salaried employees. There were now 3 managers, including myself and 2 other men, along with Mia and Alex, 3 engineers, and 21 hourly employees. In the following month, Mia and I were planning a trip to China so she could introduce me to other suppliers and help find a vendor for components needed for our upcoming product launch. As I prepared for the trip, I couldn't help but anticipate that something inappropriate might happen. Our business class seats were next to each other, and we were staying at the same hotel. We had plans to visit 2 cities together for business, and after that, Mia would head back to the western part of China to spend time with her family before returning to the United States. During this phase of my life, things were going quite well. I had enough money to make a down payment on a house, and I was in a committed relationship with my girlfriend. Despite being attracted to Mia, I hoped our interactions wouldn't turn into something intimate. I wasn't entirely confident that I could resist her advances if she made any. Throughout our long flight, our conversations mostly revolved around business with some friendly chit-chat, but nothing inappropriate. One memorable moment came when Mia asked me a hypothetical question about whether I saw her as a good leader and if I would join her if she were to start her own company. I replied affirmatively, though I found the question somewhat peculiar. After all, why would she want to start her own company when she was already a significant partner in her husband's successful enterprise? They had recently married, so it didn't seem like they were facing any marital issues. Only years later would the significance of that question become apparent. The rest of the week was highly productive as we networked, built business relationships, and identified potential vendors for new products. We stayed in the same hotel for 2 days in one city and 1 day in another before Mia departed for the western part of the country to visit her family. I didn't venture out for sightseeing, as it wasn't my preference. Instead, I spent most of my time on the phone with customers back in the United States or working on my laptop, ensuring everything ran smoothly at home. By the end of my week-long trip to China, I felt confident and comfortable in my role. I even began to see myself as an international businessman and a product marketer despite lacking formal education or qualifications in that field. I owed this opportunity to Alex, who had given me a chance to excel. Following our trip to China, it became evident that the affair had been a brief and isolated incident. I was relieved that it hadn't continued, and from then on, our relationship remained strictly professional. A few months later, I got engaged to my girlfriend, and we married shortly afterward. Financially, things were going exceptionally well, with my income reaching nearly $120,000 within a year of working there. During the same period, Mia became pregnant, and 9 months later, she gave birth to a baby girl. My wife also gave birth around the same time, as we were all of the same age and had married around the same time. Consequently, Alex and Mia made consistent efforts to include us in their social gatherings, hoping we would become close friends. My wife was open to it, but I made an effort to keep our interactions strictly business-related. I prioritized my work and family, unwilling to become entangled in any way that might jeopardize my marriage or career. I had an uneasy feeling about Alex and Mia's marriage, especially her level of control, and I wanted to avoid any involvement that could expose or perpetuate our previous affair. Let's jump ahead about 2 years, and things are going remarkably well in the business. I'm pulling in about $250,000 annually, and we have a second baby on the way. One evening, Alex gave me a call and suggested that we meet up at a bar. I found it a bit odd because we hadn't spent time together in a while, and Alex wasn't the type to hang out at bars for no good reason. He rarely drinks. So naturally, I felt a bit anxious about the situation. The nagging thought in the back of my mind was that perhaps the consequences of my affair with his wife from 2 years ago were catching up to me. As I headed to the bar, my mind raced with worries about potential job loss or some other dire outcome. Although I knew Alex well enough to understand that if he discovered the affair, he would likely fire me over the phone, making this bar meeting seem unusual. I speculated that maybe he had a different approach in mind, but I was overthinking things. Upon arriving at the bar, I was incredibly nervous. However, when Alex began sharing his troubles, it became evident that it wasn't about me. His concerns centered on his strained relationship with Mia. He had been facing family problems and needed someone to confide in. As I mentioned earlier, I hadn't been spending much time with him lately. Alex explained that one reason he distanced himself from me and some of his friends was that Mia had been trying to isolate him from anyone close to him. Over the years, their relationship had suffered due to frequent travel, and to complicate matters, her parents, who had visited them 2 years ago when they married, had refused to leave. They were now attempting to exert control over how their 2-year-old daughter was raised, causing significant strain in their marriage. Alex struggled with the challenges of raising his daughter in a multicultural home, particularly with her parents still residing with them. He lamented that his in-laws didn't listen to him for some inexplicable reason. Instead, they disregarded him and sought to isolate him within his own home. I paid close attention to Alex's story, realizing that he had likely been grappling with these issues for a while, and I was probably the closest friend he had. Despite feeling that I had grown distant from him, he must have found it challenging to share these troubles, especially knowing that I had previously cautioned him about such problems. I felt deeply sympathetic for him and believed it was unjust for his in-laws to take advantage of his mild-mannered personality. I wanted to urge him to assert himself and demand that his in-laws leave, but he mentioned that his wife had agreed to their departure for China in a few weeks. Just by listening to him, it was evident that Mia was firmly in control of their household. Alex was treading carefully in his own home, which perhaps emboldened his in-laws to dictate how he should raise his own daughter. I refrained from offering unsolicited advice about asserting his authority as the head of the household since it didn't align with his personality. I asked him about Mia's thoughts regarding her family staying in their home for such an extended period and trying to influence their daughter's upbringing. He explained that Mia supported and even encouraged it because she believed her own upbringing shaped her into the person she is today. According to Alex, Mia also felt that since both of them frequently traveled, her parents provided stability in their child's life. After hearing Alex's explanation, I couldn't find many faults in Mia's reasoning given their extensive travels. However, I kept this to myself and didn't share it with Alex, sensing there was more to the story. I pressed further, and Alex revealed that they hadn't been intimate for over 4 months. When not on business trips, Mia would use various excuses to avoid physical closeness, citing work burdens or their daughter needing attention. Alex had even suggested that she become a stay-at-home mom, but he acknowledged that Mia's ambitions didn't align with that idea. He expressed frustration that she refused to have more children, desiring a simpler family life. Alex added that Mia sought increasing control over his business despite their financial stability. I inquired if he had considered divorce, which could provide shared custody and allow him to spend more quality time with their daughter without external interference, all while protecting his finances. Alex admitted he hadn't thought about divorce or consulted a lawyer, mentioning that he intended to discuss marriage counseling with Mia. While I didn't discourage him from seeking counseling, I advised having a backup plan. I also cautioned him to stay vigilant regarding her activities, suggesting monitoring her phone, tracking her movements, and possibly installing a GPS in her car. Alex reacted with disbelief, giving me a look as if I had suggested something outrageous. He angrily dismissed my suggestions, asserting that Mia's trips were mostly international and she was not the type to have an affair. In that moment, I realized it was best to keep my thoughts to myself to avoid incriminating myself, so I silently listened to Alex's stories without offering any concrete opinions, merely echoing what he wanted to hear. My assessment at that point led me to suspect that Mia might be having an affair or contemplating divorce. This intelligent man appeared unaware of the impending threat, making him the most oblivious smart person I had ever encountered, seemingly blind to the impending upheaval in his life. I was relieved that we had that meeting because it allowed me to prepare for what might happen. I wasn't sure about the impact of their impending divorce, but it would be unwise not to plan an exit strategy. I knew I wouldn't easily replicate my current income elsewhere, so my only option might be to emulate his business model and start my own venture, leveraging the knowledge and experience I've gained. particularly in sourcing. I had already suspected that Mia had intentions of taking control of the business based on some things she had said to me previously. Furthermore, she had taken over the hiring process, favoring individuals who were loyal to her, mainly of Chinese descent. While I had harbored these suspicions earlier, they didn't quite add up at the time. She had even extended her control to the employees under my supervision, given that she had hired them. I felt powerless to make decisions without them reporting everything to her. Trust in the workplace eroded, and I attempted to regain authority over my team, but she resisted, and I had to back down to avoid being fired. Following my conversation with Alex at the bar, I observed that his motivation was dwindling, and he was becoming less diligent in his responsibilities. Fortunately, our business had a solid model that could sustain itself without actively seeking new customers, as our existing customer base was sufficient for profitability. However, it meant there would be no further product development or growth. A few days later, I noticed Mia's reduced presence at work, along with her unresponsiveness, even when I reached out via WhatsApp. A day or two later, some of our overseas suppliers began responding less promptly. It became apparent that we had lost some customers and that something significant was happening behind the scenes. After 5 consecutive days of Mia's absence, Alex called me and 3 other managers into his office to explain the situation. He revealed that he had a falling out with his wife, who was actively trying to undermine the business. Some suppliers and customers were loyal to her, and she was attempting to establish her own business while tarnishing our reputation. Alex anticipated a substantial fallout and warned us to brace ourselves, as we might have to lay off half of our employees. He instructed me to travel to China and Vietnam the following week to secure alternative suppliers if necessary. He would handle the customer relationships. After conveying this grim news, and as 2 of the managers left the room, Alex and I had a private conversation, during which he acknowledged that I had been right all along. He mentioned that the business would have suffered much more if he hadn't caught her before she could execute her plans. Following our meeting at the bar, he couldn't shake the suspicion of infidelity. Consequently, he decided to install a monitoring device on her phone. To his dismay, he discovered that she had been in romantic relationships with multiple men on WeChat. One of them had proposed and she had accepted. They intended to move in together and start a business similar to ours. She planned to marry him and bring him to the United States, taking advantage of her citizenship obtained through Alex. This man, older and more connected in China, had known her much longer than Alex had, possibly even before they met. Text messages Alex recovered revealed her intention to divorce him and take control of the company. Although the exact plan remained unclear, her plan was to divorce Alex in approximately 5 months. Still, she was exposed prematurely due to Alex's discovery and confrontation. Consequently, she abruptly stopped coming to work. Most of her trips, initially believed to be solely business-related, turned out to include romantic getaways. Alex informed me that before uncovering her affair, she had promised to attend marriage counseling and encouraged him to seek individual counseling, all while secretly planning her divorce to buy time. He shared that he had been feeling deeply depressed and had contemplated ending his life in recent days. At one point, he broke down in tears, and I comforted him. It was evident that he had been holding these emotions in for a while. I inquired about his daughter's whereabouts and whether the in-laws were still at his place. He informed me that the in-laws had left, and he had hired a babysitter for his daughter. His wife had gone missing since he confronted her. Despite his numerous attempts to contact her, she remained unresponsive. Alex also mentioned that she had been busy contacting his suppliers and customers, urging them to sever ties with his business. She had been sharing incriminating documents to undermine him. However, some loyal customers alerted him to her actions. While certain suppliers were solely motivated by financial gain, maintaining their business relationships provided they continued to receive payment, her plan did not unfold as she had hoped. By this time, I suspected that Mia had left her husband and daughter to join her boyfriend or fiancé in China. She had begun contacting her husband's customers and suppliers, attempting to steal some of his business. While she had managed to sabotage a few suppliers in China and Vietnam with limited success, It was only a matter of time before we faced shortages in critical components and received complaints about delayed deliveries. Having traveled to China and Vietnam multiple times, I had established a network in this part of the world and knew my way around. I had also attempted to source suppliers in South America, albeit with little success. Before booking our one-way trip to China, we only had about a month's worth of supply for some crucial parts that she had successfully sabotaged. Consequently, our priorities were clear. We opted for a one-way trip because we couldn't predict when we would return unless we found alternative suppliers for these critical components. I didn't dwell on why Mia would want to destroy a business she had helped build, because I had long suspected her intent to undermine Alex and take control of the business. Unfortunately, Alex had been oblivious to her intentions until it was too late, leaving us scrambling. Back then, I was still perplexed by her actions. I believed it would have made more sense for her to take over the business rather than attempting to start anew with someone else, even if he was more successful. I wondered if she had pulled the trigger by mistake, thinking that her plan was poorly thought out and bound to fail. Perhaps there was more to this story that I didn't know, but based on the information I had, that was the only conclusion I could draw regarding her motives. At this point, my primary concern was saving the business to continue paying my mortgage and maintaining the lifestyle my beautiful wife and kids had become accustomed to. I viewed her as the enemy and hadn't considered the livelihoods of the approximately 37 employees who depended on this business that Alex had built. We spent approximately 2 weeks traveling in East Asia, visiting 3 countries. Towards the end of our trip, we managed to recover some of our previous supplies because, strangely, Mia had stopped contacting our suppliers and wasn't upholding her commitments to them. In the end, money talks and we were willing to pay. It struck me as odd that she had abruptly halted her efforts to destroy the company. Whatever the reason for her sudden change, I saw it as a positive development for me. When we returned to the United States, it took about a month to weather the storm, but things eventually returned to normal. We never heard from Mia again, and I didn't see her during those months. I noticed that Alex was never the same. He was already introverted, but now he withdrew even further, becoming increasingly paranoid and defensive. Once, I asked him if he had any news about Mia, and he replied that she had abandoned him and their daughter, and he hadn't heard from her. He questioned why I was asking, which I found strange considering all we had been through over the past couple of months. A few weeks later, an employee informed me that a missing persons case had been filed for Mia, and her family claimed they didn't know her whereabouts as she hadn't contacted them in weeks. I immediately called Alex, and he confirmed it was true. He mentioned that the police had questioned him and suspected foul play. There was no evidence that she had returned to China, and since Alex was the last person to have seen her, he became the prime suspect. Alex also told me that he hadn't informed the police about his wife's affair, fearing they might use it as a motive to arrest him. He urged me not to disclose the affair to the police. At that point, I didn't suspect Alex's involvement, nor did I want to entertain the thought. Even if he were involved, I was willing to cover for him, as Mia's absence was better for my livelihood. 3 months after her reported disappearance, I noticed a significant change in Alex. He became more outgoing, reaching out to me more frequently and expressing a desire to hang out. Our business was starting to recover, and I had traveled to East Asia a couple of times. I encouraged Alex to join me in social activities, introducing him to my family and taking him out to bars and outings with my military buddies, hoping he might meet someone new. During our outings, I avoided bringing up the topic of Mia. She was now a thing of the past. During one of our hangouts, Alex confided in me about the situation with Mia's parents and her wealthy uncle. They had been contacting the police, attempting to have him arrested on suspicion of wrongdoing regarding Mia. However, there was no evidence of any crime, and Alex willingly allowed the police access to his home, cooperating fully with their investigation. He disclosed everything he knew except for the fact that she was having an affair. From an outsider's perspective, their marriage appeared stable, and neither of them had initiated divorce proceedings. After her disappearance, the revelation that Mia had taken out a substantial life insurance policy on Alex without his knowledge added to the mystery of the case, leaving both the police and us perplexed. Consequently, there was no apparent motive for Alex to be involved in her disappearance. The police likely discussed Mia extensively with the two other managers at the company, including me, as they were probing for information but lacked any significant leads. None of us were inclined to volunteer information, so if any of the managers were aware of Mia's attempts to sabotage the company and poach employees, they didn't divulge it. I was certain that if such information had come to light, it could have given the police a motive to arrest Alex or build a case against him if they hadn't already. The case remained unsolved for approximately 5 months until Mia's family in China hired a private investigation team to pursue the matter and pose questions. This team managed to convince some Chinese employees to speak about Mia's efforts to persuade them to leave the company and join her. Additionally, some of Mia's friends shared details about her dissatisfaction with her marriage and desire to leave Alex. The private investigators gathered enough probable cause to draw the attention of local newspapers, likely funded by Mia's associates in China. These newspapers began running continuous stories about Mia's case to pressure the police and the district attorney's office, as well as to generate public interest and prompt action from the DA. Subsequently, the police obtained information from the investigation conducted by the private detectives, including records of Mia's travels, purchases, transcripts of interviews with individuals, and details about her affair partner. This put added pressure on some employees, who were then brought to the police station, ultimately revealing that before her disappearance, Alex had informed me and the two managers about Mia's attempts to undermine the company, leading to my trip to China to address the damage. During my interrogation, I had a lawyer present, and I firmly declined to provide any information that could potentially incriminate me. They sought a statement from me due to my close connection with Alex and Mia, attempting to intimidate me by labeling me a suspect and an accessory to a crime. They insinuated that my decision to have legal representation was indicative of guilt. While part of me had a suspicion that Alex might have been involved in Mia's disappearance, I chose not to entertain that thought. Eventually, they abandoned their efforts to extract a statement from me, resorting to mocking tactics such as arresting me briefly and appearing at my workplace. I'm not privy to all the details, but somehow they obtained a warrant to search Alex's house once more and seized some items. Pictures of the missing Mia were displayed on bulletin boards throughout town, and it was assumed she had passed away. They appealed for information leading to an arrest, offering a monetary reward. The police investigation persisted for an additional 6 agonizing months, during which news media outlets and newspapers frequently hounded us at our workplace, attempting to extract statements. I was convinced that some of these reporters were fraudulent and paid by Mia's family. The relentless attention took a toll on some of our employees, resulting in a loss of personnel for the business. 6 months later, the situation began to settle down. I also spent time with Alex during those 6 months, and there was an unspoken understanding that he knew I suspected his involvement in Mia's disappearance, sparing me the need to inquire directly. Whatever transpired between them, I reassured myself that this woman had been attempting to jeopardize my children's well-being and dismantle a company I had poured my heart and soul into. I believed she deserved whatever consequences befell her. After the 6-month period, the district attorney decided against taking the case to trial as their evidence consisted primarily of circumstantial and hearsay testimony. Their chances of securing an indictment through a grand jury were uncertain, and there was a risk of acquittal in a trial. Moreover, if new evidence emerged later, the case might crumble entirely. Consequently, they opted to wait for additional evidence, leading to the case being relegated to the cold case section for the time being. It was placed on the back burner. The company started to recover, and it appeared that we had successfully navigated through the challenging period. Approximately a year later, while I was at the airport about to board an international flight, my wife called and urged me to turn on the local news. I reminded her of my airport location and the limited TV options, but she insisted on sharing the news herself. She mentioned that 2 weeks prior, human remains had been discovered scattered in an area likely disturbed by animals. Among the findings was a skull, which dental records confirmed to be Mia's. I immediately abandoned my travel plans and attempted to contact Alex, but he wasn't answering his phone. Alex's lawyer eventually reached out to inform me that Alex had been arrested. His bail was set at $300,000, and we promptly secured his release once the judge permitted it. In short, I had a chance to speak with Alex, and he disclosed that it was an accident. According to him, Mia had informed him of her intention to leave him and take their daughter to China. He resisted, resulting in a physical confrontation during which she hit her head against the wall and collapsed. Although she regained consciousness and was lying on the couch, she continued to express her plans. Alex helped her onto the couch and provided a blanket as she refused to go to the bedroom. He considered taking her to the hospital but feared involving the police, believing that she would recover by morning. The following day, he returned to the living room and discovered that she had passed away, noticing blood oozing from the back of her head. His account aligned with the coroner's report, which indicated a minor fracture at the back of her skull, blunt force trauma. The coroner couldn't definitively determine whether the force had caused her death, but she may have bled out. After a trial, Alex was convicted of second-degree manslaughter, with the jury recommending a prison sentence of over 20 years. As of my writing, he has served 3 months of his sentence, and we are in the process of appealing his case. Alex has transferred most of his business to me, and I have committed to supporting him financially. Additionally, I'm currently engaged in a custody battle with Mia's parents as we seek to adopt their 5-year-old daughter, which aligns with Alex's wishes and the close relationship she has developed with my own children. I believe our home would provide a loving environment for her.